They thought it was a joke when the 15-year-old walked onto the deck. The starting judge even smirked, exchanging glances with officials nearby, as if wondering who had allowed this child into a race meant for men who had dedicated their entire lives to the sport. The Sydney 2000 Olympic Games represented the pinnacle of human athletic achievement. And here was Michael Phelps, a lanky teenager from Baltimore, standing among giants who had crushed world records and collected medals like trophies. The judge's laughter wasn't malicious, but it carried that unmistakable tone of disbelief, the kind that says some things simply don't belong. What none of them understood was that the boy staring down at lane 4 wasn't there by accident, and the silence that would follow his touch would be far louder than any mockery. The Olympic Aquatic Center in Sydney held an atmosphere so thick with expectation you could almost swim through it. This wasn't just another competition. This was the 200-meter butterfly final, an event that separated pretenders from legends, where technique met raw endurance in a test that punished even the slightest weakness. The field was stacked with names that commanded respect across every continent. Ian Crocker, Tom Malchow, Denis Silantiev, swimmers who had logged thousands of hours perfecting every stroke, every turn, every breath. Their bodies were sculpted instruments of speed, their minds hardened by years of pressure that would break most people before they even touched the water. And then there was Phelps, barely old enough to drive, his frame still growing into the wingspan that would one day become legendary. To the crowd, to the commentators, to that judge who couldn't suppress his amusement, it seemed almost cruel to put him in this environment. The betting odds reflected it. The experts predicted it. Even some of his own supporters wondered if maybe, just maybe, this was too much too soon. But Michael Phelps had never cared much for what seemed reasonable. While everyone saw a boy, he saw an opportunity that might never come again. His coach, Bob Bowman, had built something different in him, something that didn't rely on waiting for the right time or the safe moment. Bowman understood that greatness wasn't about comfort. It was about putting yourself in situations where failure seemed not just possible, but probable, and then finding a way to make the impossible bend to your will. So when Phelps qualified for Sydney, when he stood as the youngest male swimmer on the United States Olympic team in 68 years, it wasn't a fluke. It was the result of a preparation so intense, so obsessive, that it bordered on madness. But there was a problem. One that went beyond age or experience. The crisis emerged not in the pool, but in the moments before, in the weight of expectation that crushed down on his shoulders like an ocean of doubt. Standing on that starting block, Phelps felt something he rarely acknowledged: fear. Not of the race itself, but of what it meant if he failed. This wasn't practice. This wasn't even the Olympic trials. This was the moment where legends were born or buried, where a single mistake could define you forever. Around him, these men exuded confidence born from battle scars, from races won in arenas just as hostile as this one. They had been tested. They had survived. Michael Phelps was about to discover if his thousands of training hours meant anything when the entire world was watching. The judge's smirk flashed through his mind. That casual dismissal. That unspoken message that he didn't belong. And for just a fraction of a second, doubt crept in. Maybe they were right. Maybe he was just a kid playing in a game designed for warriors. But here's what none of them knew, what couldn't be seen from the stands or understood by commentators analyzing splits and technique. Phelps had been preparing for this exact feeling his entire competitive life. Bowman hadn't just trained his body. He had weaponized his mind against the very doubt that was trying to consume him now. Every morning at 5, when darkness still owned Baltimore and most teenagers were dreaming of anything but chlorine and pain, Phelps was already in the water. Not just swimming, but rehearsing failure. Bowman would create scenarios of disaster, moments where everything went wrong, where goggles leaked or cramps seized muscles or competitors surged ahead with seemingly insurmountable leads. And in those manufactured crises, Phelps learned something more valuable than any technique: that panic was a choice, and excellence lived on the other side of fear. He had visualized this race hundreds of times, felt the burn in his shoulders, tasted the metallic tang of oxygen debt, experienced the moment when his body screamed to stop. And in every visualization, he had found a way to take one more stroke. There was something else, something that existed in the realm between science and mythology. Phelps possessed physical attributes that seemed almost designed by evolution specifically for swimming. His wingspan exceeded his height by 3 inches, creating a paddle effect that generated propulsion most swimmers could only dream of. His ankles flexed to angles that biomechanics experts studied with fascination, essentially creating a fin-like effect that added power to every kick. His lung capacity measured at twice the average for someone his size, allowing him to process oxygen with an efficiency that bordered on superhuman. But these were just tools. What made them devastating was the mind that wielded them. While others saw a 200-meter butterfly as a race, Phelps saw it as a puzzle with a solution only he could calculate. Every competitor had patterns, rhythms they fell into under pressure. He had studied them not just in competition but in practice videos, in the micro-movements they made when fatigue set in. He knew that Malkow would surge early, trying to establish dominance. He knew that Silantiev would hold back, saving everything for a final 50 meters of pure aggression. And he knew something else, that in the space between their strategies lay a window so small, so precise, that only someone willing to risk complete destruction could exploit it. The starting signal cracked through the arena like a gunshot, and 8 bodies exploded into the water with a violence that sent spray cascading into the air. Malkow immediately seized the lead, his strokes powerful and measured, exactly as Phelps had predicted. The first 100 meters unfolded like a carefully choreographed dance of dominance, with the American veteran showing why he was the favorite, why betting against him seemed almost foolish. Phelps sat in 4th place, his position appearing to confirm every doubt that had been whispered before the race. The television commentators began preparing their narratives about valuable experience gained, about the future being bright even if the present fell short. That judge who had smirked was probably nodding, his assumptions validated. But at the 100-meter turn, something shifted. Phelps didn't just turn. He transformed. His underwater dolphin kick, that weapon he had sharpened through thousands of repetitions, exploded with a power that seemed to violate the basic laws of fluid dynamics. Where others came up after 3 or 4 kicks, Phelps stayed under for 7, 8 kicks, each one propelling him forward with a force that created bubbles streaming behind him like a jet engine. When he surfaced, he wasn't in 4th anymore. He wasn't even in 3rd. He had sliced through the water with such precision that suddenly, impossibly, he was in contention. His stroke rate increased, but not with the frantic energy of desperation. This was controlled violence, every pull calculated to maximize speed, while preserving the energy he would need for the final 25 meters. His breathing pattern shifted to a rhythm that seemed almost meditative, pulling oxygen in massive gulps that fed muscles screaming for fuel. The other swimmers felt it before they saw it, that presence in their peripheral vision, that shadow gaining ground where no shadow should exist. At 150 meters, with 50 to go, the race became something else entirely. This wasn't about technique anymore. This was about will, about who wanted it more when every muscle burned and every breath felt like inhaling fire. Malkow was still ahead, but his lead was evaporating. Silantiev made his move, that final surge he had been saving, and for a moment it looked like he might steal everything. But Phelps had one more gear, one more level that existed in a place beyond physical training. His final 25 meters defied rational explanation. Stroke rate increased to levels that should have shredded efficiency, but somehow each pull still grabbed massive amounts of water. His kick, that genetically gifted, obsessively trained weapon, fired with a frequency that made his legs look less like human limbs and more like some aquatic adaptation designed purely for speed. The other swimmers began to fade, their bodies betraying them as oxygen debt collected its toll. Phelps accelerated. The final 5 meters played out in a chaos of water and sound, the crowd roaring as they realized what was happening, as they understood that they were witnessing something that shouldn't be possible. Phelps stretched for the wall, his fingertips reaching through foam and turbulence, and when electronic timing measured the margins, when the scoreboard flashed the results, the arena went silent for just a heartbeat. 5th place. 1:56.50. Not a medal, not even close to what most would call success. But here's what the numbers didn't show. Michael Phelps, at 15 years old, had just recorded the fastest time by any American teenager in Olympic history. He had beaten swimmers twice his age who had spent years training for this moment. He had looked at giants and refused to blink. You know what separated that race from everything else? It wasn't about winning. It was about a 15-year-old kid proving that age is just a number when obsession meets opportunity. Do you follow the journey of athletes who refuse to accept limits, who walk into arenas where they supposedly don't belong and rewrite what's possible? If Phelps's story resonates with you, hit that subscribe button, because we're just getting started with the moments that define the greatest swimmer in history. That judge who had smirked before the race? The cameras caught him after, his expression transformed into something between shock and respect. Because he had just learned what the rest of the world would spend the next 8 years discovering, Michael Phelps wasn't bound by the same rules that governed normal athletes. He didn't care about your expectations or your odds or your predictions about what teenagers could or couldn't do. What happened in Sydney was just the opening chapter, the first whisper of a storm that would eventually collect 23 Olympic gold medals and shatter records that still stand today. But it all started here, in this moment where a boy decided that being laughed at was just another obstacle to overcome. The lesson wasn't about swimming. It was about what happens when preparation meets opportunity, when someone willing to embrace suffering as a daily practice gets their chance to show what months and years of invisible work can produce. Phelps didn't beat everyone that day in Sydney, but he announced his arrival in a way that couldn't be ignored. He had stared into the face of doubt, both external and internal, and emerged not just intact, but hungry for more. Every champion has a moment where the world tells them they're not ready, not good enough, not qualified to compete at the highest level. What defines them isn't whether they hear that message, but what they do with it. Michael Phelps heard the laughter and turned it into fuel. That night, back in the Olympic Village, while other swimmers celebrated or mourned their results, Phelps was already thinking about the next race, the next opportunity, the next chance to prove that what everyone had just witnessed wasn't a fluke, but a preview. Bob Bowman knew it too. They didn't celebrate the 5th-place finish because they both understood that this was just the beginning. The training that had seemed obsessive before would intensify. The visualizations would become even more detailed. The physical gifts would be honed into weapons so precise, so devastating, that by Athens 2004, by Beijing 2008, the question wouldn't be whether Michael Phelps could compete with the best, but whether anyone could compete with him. That's the power of refusing to respect limits that others try to impose on you. That's the legacy of walking into a space where you're not supposed to belong and making it yours anyway. That judge's smirk disappeared the moment Phelps touched the wall, replaced by the undeniable reality that something special had just announced itself to the world. And if you're someone who believes that greatness isn't about where you start, but about the work you're willing to put in when no one's watching, then you understand why this moment in Sydney mattered. Hit that like button if this story reminded you why we celebrate athletes who redefine what's possible, and subscribe because Michael Phelps's journey was just beginning. And trust me, you don't want to miss what comes next.